In this video, we're going to cover some of the basic syntax of the Python programming language. Now, I do want to stress that this will be fairly basic in that a full study of the language syntax is, of course, could be quite exhaustive.
Sure.
What I want to do in this video is just give some basic points to the really key areas of Python, especially where it differs from other programming languages. Because once again, this is a course that is targeted at people who are familiar with the concept of programming.
Right.
And so many of the things that define Python syntax are actually applicable in many programming languages, things such as expressions and so forth, and statements and whatnot. What I want to cover is the way, one, I'll just point out that Python is case sensitive, meaning that if you have two variables with different casing, you actually have two distinct variables.
Okay.
We're going to take a look at compound statements, and that's more commonly known as code blocks, where you have a set of statements, multiple statements that are all grouped together based on some header. And I want to point out also how comments work.
Okay.
So to get started, let me first point out the case sensitivity thing. And really that is just the idea is Python is case sensitive. Let me just give a quick example of what that implies. In my Python projects folder, I already have this test Python script. I'm going to open it up just for pure convenience, but once I get in here, I'm going to wipe everything out. So we are essentially starting from a fresh file. To give the point of case sensitivity, what if we had a scenario where we had two variables? We'll make a variable called text that points at the word cat, and then we'll make another variable with a capital letter T for text, and we'll set this variable to the word mouse. Now, because Python is case sensitive, we have just created two separate and distinct variables. This does differ from some languages, such as Visual Basic, where they are case insensitive, meaning the language will just grab whatever is the closest representation. You could define this variable, later reference it with a capital letter, and end up looking at the original. Of course, here in Python it's case sensitive, so we have defined two different variables. We can show that by printing lowercase text, printing uppercase text, and running. If you run, we see cat and then mouse, two distinct values. And one final point we could show is that if we print text with all capital letters, that causes an error because capital letter text is not defined. So just wanted to point that out in case you were unfamiliar with whether or not it is in fact case sensitive. Or if you're coming from a case insensitive language and suddenly wondering why you can't do certain things.
Sure.
Alright, now the next topic I want to hit is the way that code blocks work within Python. And in my opinion, this is one of the key defining
aspects of the language
aspects of the language, because in many languages there are some type of block, begin and end, character or keyword.
Such as the word begin and end,
Exactly.
if you're coming from Pascal, or an open curly brace and closing curly brace if you're coming from other very well-known languages.
So while the idea of a code block is very general in structured programming, the way that it's done differs language to language. Now the way it works in Python is the indentation itself defines the code block level. And of course, what's interesting about this is in many other structured languages, indentation is used for readability even though it is not necessary. It's just considered a good practice.
So here, that's kind of awesome. It forces you to make sure that your code is readable.
Because the indentation is the very fact that defines the way code blocks work. That means in order to have working structured code, it will just by nature end up tabbed correctly. To give an example of this, let's put together a compound statement. What I mean by compound statement is simply something that is going to require a code block, meaning the example I'm going to use is a for statement. We have a for statement, and we want to have some code or a suite of code that runs only if that for statement, or as that for statement executes. To give an example of that, we could do the, I almost want to say familiar for char in string like we had done back in the Hello World example. So for char in, I'll make a string called some text. And the way this works is you need to use code blocks in any case where, again, you have a compound statement where you have a header, which is some condition or, I guess, some control structure, I'll say. Make it very general. Control structure such as ifs or loops. So once we've followed with the colon, that indicates that we're now into a suite, meaning a code block. So if we hit enter, because of idle itself, it's noticed that we have begun the suite portion itself, and has actually already auto-tabbed us in one tab character.
Okay.
And in this case, it's 4 spaces in the idle editor by default. So now we are tabbed over, so basically there is one indentation. So that means if we were to run a print statement, so if we print char, then that is the suite going with this compound statement, or the indentation level. So if we hit enter, we can hit backspace and de-indent back to, I guess you could say, the top level, run one more print statement, which I'll just show the word done. Now if we run the program and look at what's going on, we can see each character printed on its own line, because print char goes along with this for statement. Now, once again, the way a code block is defined is purely on indentation. That means we can change the behavior of this code merely by adding an indentation to one of the lines of code. Because we now have an indentation level matching the for statement for this second print, if we rerun now, we have done printed for every single character. Note that the space between these is irrelevant. It's all about the indentation level.
Okay. Now, acting as a complete beginner to Python, this indentation, does it have to be X number of spaces over?
It doesn't. It just has to be consistent for that level.
Okay.
What I mean by that is we could say that, all right, for statement is for some reason only one space. Now, if I don't adjust anything else, when we try to run that looks like an error, it's like, okay, we can't use this indentation. Really, this indentation wasn't a problem. It's this guy floating out in space. Print does not invoke a list of or a list of statements. So print is out here floating at some indentation level that doesn't exist. If we bring him back to one space as well, then all that works.
Very nice.
And that can even change level by level. That means we could duplicate some of this code. If I just copy and paste a new for statement, we could have this guy suddenly use another amount of indentation, and it works just fine. It's just that you have to maintain this much space for this given indentation.
Okay.
Now, there are further technicalities with using actual tab characters versus spaces depending on how the editors work, but that gets a little bit more technical. I'm just pointing that out because I've used the words tab and space. I would also like to point out that because of the way we've got idle set up, if I bring up the configuration, our tabs are actually for spaces, just to follow what's generally used in Python programming. This can be adjusted for any visual result you'd like to see. But I do want to point out that as I'm using the tab key, actually let me jump down a few more characters. If I use the tab key and then hold shift, I can actually go 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces back. So even though I'm using the tab key, I'm not injecting actual tab characters.
Okay.
Not saying that tab character is an invalid character, just saying that if your text editor allows it, it's generally a bad idea to include both tabs and spaces at the same time.
Okay.
Though generally you wouldn't want to do that anyway, because that would make the text a lot harder to select if you end up moving from editor to editor with your source files. So really be worse on the source files before you end up getting into any technical problems. Now, two more things I want to point out. One is we can, of course, have nested conditions, or excuse me, nested code blocks. Meaning, let's go back to our first example, or write some of the stuff below. Let's say after we print the character, we want to run a check of some sort. So just for example, I could run an if statement and say if char is equal to w, or excuse me, I'm going to use a character that exists. Let's say t for the beginning in text. So if char equals t, followed by colon, jump down a line. So now we're at one more level of indentation. If we print out char was t. So now if we run, let me actually take done back level because I don't want it running as part of the loop. So we can see that we have character, character, character until we hit t. Now char was t, so we're under this indentation level. But once again, we can actually pull any line we want to any level. So we could actually take this done from being on its own. One indentation would be part of the for loop. Another indentation would now be part of this if. So now every time we hit char was t, we also see done.
Nice.
So once again, just showing that the indentation level causes whatever statement to be grouped within whatever level based on that indentation.
Excellent.
So I guess that that is a really brief introduction to how indentation works. Again, just stressing the point that it is the actual indentation that controls how statements are grouped.
Okay.
All right. Two more things I want to hit really quickly, and that is you can actually put multiple statements on one line. This, of course, meaning that the new line character acts as a split between statements. You notice scenarios like this if statement, this print character was t and print done are two distinct statements. That means we actually have multiple statements held within. Now, because of indentation, it would seem to imply that you have to have a new line between individual statements. There is an exception to this in that you can use the semicolon character to put multiple statements on a single line, meaning I could actually bring these up on one line followed. So I could take a semicolon to terminate one of them, print another one on the same line, and then we have everything all working.
Right.
This also means that you can, if you want, put that semicolon character on the end of a line, and it does not cause an error. It just looks like we have an orphan terminator there. But really all it's doing is ending off that statement when the new line was about to end the statement anyway, so you just have a redundant ending character.
Right.
So it's basically delimiting nothing.
Sure. But the nice thing is, if you happen to be working back and forth in languages that require the terminator at the end, if you accidentally slip up and throw one here, it's no big deal.
Yeah, but it doesn't immediately break your code. It does probably mean that someone else is going to chuckle at the
Yeah,
source file if they end up looking at it.
Yeah.
But again, it doesn't break anything. You may have even seen me type that in the past if you watched some of our previous Python videos. As well, here at 3D Buzz we work on a few different programming languages, and if earlier that day I was in some other language that maybe had a terminator character, it'll slip my mind and I'll end up typing it.
Sure.
But just to point it out, that's why it wasn't an error. Is we can actually use the semicolon to mean something in making multiple statements on single lines. It's just redundant if it's used by itself on the end of the line because there's no need for it.
Okay.
Alright, one last thing I want to cover in this video, and that is the use of comments in Python. Up until now we have not specifically addressed this. And really I'm only going to spend a moment doing this because the comment in Python is a single line comment only. It is, in order to create a comment, you simply use the pound character. So if we wanted to comment out one of these print lines, we could just put a pound character before it. We see it highlighted in red due to our current highlighting, and that has now become a comment. So we've essentially just commented out that one line.
Okay.
We could have also, of course, use comments just for documentation, or we would say this for loop
Here's an example.
yeah, walks through each character.
And take T out of through. All right, very nice.
But again, just showing that these are in fact comments. If we run, we note that our comment documenting the for loop simply doesn't appear out here at all, and our print character char was T doesn't appear either because we have commented it out.
Right, we just see the word done each time T was printed. Cool.
And also point out that there is no multi-line character, or there is no multi-line comment in Python. There is no character to indicate multi-line comment. There are ways to do the equivalent of multi-line comments using strings, but we'll get into that when we get more deep into strings themselves.
Okay.
And we'll point out that a lot of editors do give a facility for performing multi-line commenting operations, including idle. If we go up to format, we can actually go in and comment out an entire region. And if we do that, it places double hash marks before everything. So if you do have a block of code you want to quickly get rid of and you don't want to drop into strings, if you really want to use actual comments just for your coding style, you can still very quickly comment out multiple lines of code. It's just that there's no multi-line comment, meaning no begin character, end character style comment.
Okay.
You'll also note that there are in idle, the shortcuts for those are Alt-3 and Alt-4, where Alt-4 is a shortcut for an operation which will uncomment a region, basically looking for any double hash marks and removing them. So that means if we would like to quickly uncomment this, we could select the entire block and press Alt-4 and quickly remove the comments.
Nice.
So Alt-3, Alt-4. So you can still very quickly go in and comment out multiple things without having multi-line comments, just pointing out that there is no multi-line comment character on its own. And I think with that really wraps up this quick look at Python syntax. Again, just showing the fact that we're dealing with a case-sensitive language. We use indentation to indicate code blocks, and we took a very quick look at comments.
Okay, and with that, then, that is going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.